This is serious. The person you love deeply may never be the same after what happened last night. My beloved child, stop scrolling for just a moment. Something has been quietly waiting for you, and whether you found these words by chance or by choice, let your heart become still before you continue. There are moments that seem ordinary until you realize they were the beginning of a story you could never have imagined. This is one of those moments. What you are about to hear is a work of fiction, a spiritual story meant to inspire reflection, hope, and courage. Yet if it stirs something deep within you, do not ignore that feeling. Sometimes stories awaken truths our hearts have forgotten. You have carried a question that you have never fully spoken aloud. You have smiled when others expected you to smile, answered politely when people asked if everything was fine, and continued moving through each day as though your soul had not been whispering for something more. But beneath the surface, your heart has been watching one person more closely than anyone realizes. Every conversation, every silence, every distant look has mattered to you far more than you have admitted. Last night, something changed, not in the way rumors describe change. Not in the way the world measures it. The kind of change that leaves no obvious marks and yet somehow alters everything inside a person. It happened so quietly that almost no one would notice. If you had been standing beside them, you might have thought it was just another evening. Another sunset. Another ordinary night disappearing into tomorrow. But heaven sees moments differently in this story. There are nights when the stars seem to hold their breath. There are evenings when a single decision sends ripples farther than anyone can see. And there are moments when a heart stands at a crossroads without even realizing it. The one you love stood at such a crossroads, you have wondered why they seemed different. Why their voice carried a weight that was not there before. Why their eyes appeared to search for something beyond the room they were standing in. You noticed it, even if no one else did. Love often notices what the crowd cannot. Perhaps they laughed, perhaps they said they were fine, perhaps they even told you not to worry. But something inside you refused to believe that was the whole story. That feeling was not born from fear alone, it was born from love. Love listens beyond words. It notices pauses between sentences. It recognizes when silence becomes heavier than speech. It remembers expressions that everyone else forgets. You have been remembering. You have replayed conversations in your mind. You have questioned whether you should have said something different. Whether one more message, one more phone call, one more moment together could have changed something neither of you fully understood. But this story is not about regret, not yet, because before anyone can understand what happened last night, they must understand what was already happening long before darkness covered the sky. Every heart carries hidden rooms. Some are filled with beautiful memories. Some are locked because they contain pain too difficult to revisit. The person you love has been carrying a room they have never invited anyone to enter. Not because they wanted to deceive you, not because they did not trust you, but because even they did not know how to describe what waited behind that door. People often become experts at hiding the places where they feel weakest. They become skilled at changing the subject. They become talented at making everyone else laugh while quietly wondering why joy feels so distant inside themselves. Maybe you noticed small changes over the past weeks, a slower reply, a different smile, an unusual hesitation before answering simple questions. Perhaps they seemed physically present but emotionally far away, like someone standing on the shore while their thoughts drifted somewhere beyond the horizon. You tried to understand, you told yourself they were simply tired, busy, distracted, but your heart continued asking questions your mind could not answer. That is where our story truly begins, because some nights are not measured by hours, they are measured by decisions. Invisible decisions, quiet battles, moments where no audience applauds, no headlines appear, and yet eternity itself seems to lean closer. Last night was one of those nights. If someone had looked through a window, they might have seen nothing extraordinary: a chair, a lamp, a phone resting on a table, perhaps rain touching the glass, perhaps complete silence. Everything looked ordinary, yet inside one human heart, an invisible storm had already begun. Storms do not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they arrive as exhaustion, as disappointment, as questions that refuse to disappear, as the quiet belief that tomorrow will simply repeat yesterday forever. The person you love had been carrying thoughts heavier than anyone imagined. Not all burdens are visible, not every wound bleeds, not every cry is spoken aloud. Some cries echo only inside the soul, and sometimes those silent cries become louder after sunset. You have sensed this without knowing why. There were moments when you wanted to ask deeper questions. You almost did. Something held you back. Maybe you feared hearing an answer you were not prepared for. Maybe they smiled just enough to convince you everything was all right, or maybe life simply kept moving too quickly for either of you to pause long enough to truly see each other. Life often does that. It fills calendars while emptying conversations. It keeps people connected by devices while leaving hearts separated by silence. Yet despite all of this, something extraordinary was unfolding, not because the heavens forced it, not because destiny erased human choice, but because every story reaches a chapter where hidden truths can no longer remain hidden forever. That chapter arrived last night. Imagine standing at the edge of a forest just before dawn. Everything appears still, yet beneath the surface, thousands of unseen movements are already taking place. Leaves trembling, wind changing direction, birds preparing to sing. Light slowly approaching long before anyone actually sees the sunrise. That is how unseen change often begins, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. The heart of the one you love entered such a moment. Something they had buried for years began rising toward the surface: old memories, forgotten promises, unfinished grief, questions they believed had disappeared forever. All of it returned together, not to destroy them, but neither to leave them unchanged. Transformation rarely asks permission before it begins, it simply arrives. Perhaps this explains something that has puzzled you recently. Perhaps this is why their eyes look different, not empty, not hopeless. Just searching for language capable of describing what they themselves could barely understand. You have been searching too, searching for reassurance, searching for certainty, searching for one sign that everything will eventually make sense. That desire is deeply human. Everyone longs to know that difficult seasons serve a purpose beyond the pain they bring. Our story lives inside that longing. There is another detail you do not yet know, not because it has been intentionally hidden from you, because every meaningful story unfolds one page at a time. If every answer arrived immediately, the heart would never learn patience. If every mystery disappeared instantly, faith would never grow. So listen carefully. Last night, while the world slept, something unexpected interrupted the ordinary rhythm of their evening. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, it did not arrive surrounded by impossible signs. It came quietly, almost gently, the kind of moment many people overlook until years later when they finally realize it changed everything. The person you love stopped what they were doing. Only for a moment, something caught their attention. Perhaps it was a memory, perhaps a familiar song, perhaps an old photograph, perhaps words they had not heard in years suddenly echoed within their thoughts. Whatever it was, time seemed to slow. For just a few breaths, yesterday, today, and tomorrow felt strangely connected. It frightened them, not because the moment itself was terrifying, because it forced them to see something they had been avoiding. Sometimes truth waits patiently until we become quiet enough to hear it. That quiet finally arrived, and once truth begins speaking inside the heart, pretending not to hear becomes almost impossible. They sat there longer than usual, thinking, remembering, questioning. No one knew, no one interrupted. The night simply surrounded them while invisible questions grew louder. What have I become? Where am I really going? What matters now? Who truly knows me? Who would understand if I told them everything? Those questions have changed countless lives, not because questions possess power by themselves, because honest questions often become the doorway through which healing first enters. But healing almost always feels uncomfortable before it feels beautiful. That is the part few people talk about. The breaking before rebuilding, the silence before clarity, the uncertainty before peace. The person you love stepped into that uncomfortable place. You sensed something, even from a distance. Love has mysterious ways of noticing when another heart begins carrying a heavier weight. Perhaps that explains why they crossed your mind unexpectedly, why you almost reached for your phone, why something whispered that you should pray, reflect, or simply remember them. Sometimes compassion awakens before understanding arrives. You may not realize it now, but your own story has been quietly intertwining with theirs in ways neither of you could fully see. Every conversation, every absence, every misunderstanding, every unexpected reunion, each became another thread woven into a much larger tapestry. Yet one thread remains hidden, one truth remains unspoken, one choice made last night continues sending quiet ripples into today. The remarkable part is this: the choice itself seemed incredibly small, almost insignificant. If another person had witnessed it, they might have forgotten it within minutes. Yet some moments become important not because they appear extraordinary, but because of what they quietly begin. And what began last night has not finished unfolding, not even close. Right now, as you listen to these words, The person you love is carrying something they have not yet found the courage to explain. It is changing the way they see themselves. It is changing the way they remember the past. It may even change the way they look at you the next time your paths cross. But before you discover what that hidden choice truly was, before you understand why this ordinary night became unlike any other, before the final piece of the story is revealed, there is one forgotten detail from earlier that evening, one detail so small that almost everyone would dismiss it without a second thought, yet everything that happened afterward began with that single moment, and once you know what it was, you will never look at this story the same way again. They paused, not because they had nowhere to go, not because they had forgotten what they were doing. They paused because something familiar suddenly felt unfamiliar. There was an object before them, ordinary in every way. It could have been a photograph tucked inside an old book, a handwritten note folded so many times that the edges had softened, a message buried deep in years of conversations, or even a melody that drifted unexpectedly through the quiet. What mattered was not the object itself. What mattered was what it awakened. Memory has a way of arriving without asking permission. One heartbeat, everything seems ordinary. The next, the walls around carefully hidden emotions begin to crack. The person you love had spent so long convincing themselves that certain chapters were finished that they never imagined one quiet evening could reopen them with such unexpected force. As the night settled around them, they found themselves staring, not really at the object before them, but beyond it, beyond yesterday, beyond disappointment, beyond the version of themselves they had slowly become. There are moments when people suddenly see their own lives from a completely different perspective. It is as though they step outside themselves for only an instant and ask questions they have avoided for years. What am I protecting? What am I afraid of losing? What have I stopped believing about myself? Those questions echoed through the silence. No one else heard them, yet inside their heart, they were louder than thunder. The room itself remained unchanged. The same walls, the same ceiling, the same dim light stretching gentle shadows across familiar furniture, yet the atmosphere felt entirely different, not because something supernatural had visibly appeared. Because honesty had quietly entered the room. Honesty changes everything. It strips away the stories we tell ourselves simply to survive. It asks us to look directly at the places we have spent years avoiding. It reminds us that healing begins where pretending ends. The person you love realized they had been carrying exhaustion that sleep could never fix. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. The kind that grows slowly over months and years until it becomes so familiar that people mistake it for normal life. They had learned how to function, how to smile, how to answer questions, how to celebrate other people's victories, how to encourage everyone around them, yet beneath every conversation lived one silent question they never allowed anyone to hear. Will anyone truly understand me if they see all of me? That question has lived inside countless hearts. Perhaps it has lived inside yours as well. It is remarkable how many people fear being fully known more than they fear being alone. So they hide, not because they are dishonest, because they are afraid that honesty will cost them love. The person you love had quietly built those invisible walls one difficult season at a time. Each disappointment became another stone, each misunderstanding became another layer, each unanswered hope became another locked door, until eventually even they forgot how many doors existed. Then came last night. Without warning, one of those doors slowly opened. Not completely, just enough for light to enter. At first they resisted it, old habits always do. They almost stood up, almost distracted themselves, almost returned to the routine that had helped them avoid this moment countless times before, almost. But something inside whispered, "Stay." It was not a command filled with fear, it felt more like an invitation to remain present instead of running. An invitation to stop escaping their own heart. They stayed. Minute after minute, the silence grew uncomfortable, then strangely peaceful. Thoughts they had buried beneath constant activity finally rose to the surface, faces they had not remembered in years. Words they wished they could take back, dreams they quietly abandoned without ever admitting it, promises they made to themselves that slowly disappeared beneath ordinary life. Every memory seemed connected by one invisible thread, not failure, not shame, longing, a longing to become whole again, to stop surviving and start living, to stop pretending and start breathing freely, to stop wondering whether change was still possible. And then, something happened that they themselves could hardly explain. Not around them, within them. For one brief moment, they stopped blaming everyone else. That may not sound extraordinary, but it changed the direction of the entire night. Because blame keeps people trapped in yesterday.